I'd like to introduce our distinguished speaker, Rick Roderick, K5UR. Rick lives north of Little Rock, Arkansas, on a 50-acre hilltop QTH. I'm sure many of us just would be frothing at the mouth to be able to live in a place like that and be able to set up the antennas that he's probably got. He's been a ham for over 47 years and is a life member of the American Radio Relay League. Rick has held numerous ARRL positions continuously for all those 47 plus years. He's been on the ARRL board of directors for 22 years and currently serves as first vice president of the ARRL. He has served on all standing committees of the ARRL board and has served on numerous other committees and task forces of the board over the years. He served on the DX Advisory Committee and was chairman of it for numerous years, and was instrumental in the creation and the implementation of Logbook of the World, as well as the DXCC Challenge Award that so many of us either use or pursue. Rick has held numerous HF and VHF UHF operating and achievement awards. He's an avid DXer with 370 countries worked, including 320 on 160 meters, 351 on 80, 353 on 40, and some of the top standings in the world. And it's all devoted to his passion for amateur radio, much like all of ours. He holds DXCC on 10 bands and is ranked 7th in the world on the DXCC Challenge Award, holds over 20 Worked All Zones awards, and was one of the first to achieve Worked All Zones on 160 meters. That's just on HF. On VHF, UHF, he's held many operating and achievement records, including the world's distance record for QSOs on 2-meter meteor scatter and 222 megahertz tropo. He was one of the first to work all continental 48 states on 2 meters without the use of moon bounce, 47 of those states in a single year. He is second in the world on 6-meter VUCC and first in the world on VUCC on 2 meters, 222 and 432 megahertz, as well as 1296, all non-Earth, Moon, Earth. He received the Fred Fish Memorial Award number 3 for having worked all grid squares in the United States on 6 meters recently. Rick graduated from the University of Arkansas, and if you can believe it, he's got a life outside of amateur radio, with a BS degree in mathematics, an MS degree in operations management, and a law degree. After working 20 years in business, he entered private practice with an emphasis in labor and employment law and is managing partner of a firm with 3 locations in Arkansas. He and his wife, Holly, have 2 grown children, and Holly, for those of you who know her, and I hope everybody gets a chance to meet her this weekend, is very well known for her active part in representing amateur radio and the ARRL alongside Rick wherever they go. I think it goes without saying that they both have a deep, deep passion for amateur radio, much like all of us, and that is exactly why, in my opinion, ARRL has been so fortunate to be as successful as it has for the last 100 years and will no doubt be very successful in the next 100. Personally speaking, I have had great pleasure working alongside Rick in the boardroom. His counsel, his stories, his passion is extremely apparent, and I think he's going to share a little bit of that with you this afternoon. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome my good friend, Rick Roderick, K5UR.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I hope I'm 5'9" plus in the back. Everybody hear me okay? I do like to be loud. Brian, thank you for that nice introduction. I appreciate that. And welcome to the ARRL National Convention and the Centennial celebration. It's great to see everyone here, and got to see a lot of old friends standing in line for the buffet and brought back a lot of memories. I wish I had more time this afternoon to even start telling stories on some of them. But it just is a great opportunity for us to get together and talk about ham radio. Obviously, this is a once-in-a-lifetime event for those of us here, for the most part, and we hope that you'll enjoy yourselves. We welcome our international guest. Welcome to America, and welcome to the American Radio Relay League. When I look out there at this group, I see a lot of fine folks, and I hope that everyone in this room shares the same passion for ham radio as I do. I'm thrilled to talk to you because I'm very proud of ham radio, and I consider everyone in this room to be an elite person. Yes, I said elite, and I believe we are an elite group of people because we're amateur radio operators, and ham radio is the greatest hobby in the world. I was asked to talk about ham radio and specifically tell some of my stories that I often like to tell. And I said, sure, I'll be glad to. How long do I have? And they said 25 minutes, and I said, no way. So I've done what I could to pare this down, but I do want to have an opportunity to tell some of the stories that I have that I like to tell sometimes at club meetings and all, to illustrate the passion that I think an individual can have, like myself and you, for this wonderful hobby. I'm a ham radio addict. I suspect a lot of you in here are as well. And I think it's important that we talk about the greatest hobby in the world. Some of the stories I'm going to tell I call treasured memories. Some of them sometimes are hard to tell without bringing a tear to the eye. But these kinds of stories that I tell, and the ones that I think everybody in this room has that their own, are those that are the kind that inspire people. And I would hope that you take on a serious note for what they're intended, and that is, let's make sure we go back home and tell those stories forever and ever to keep people enthused about this wonderful hobby. I'm going to talk about some things that I believe will draw on the passion you have for this hobby. So when we leave this convention, you will think about them and hopefully take the message back. I'm going to talk about the love we have for the hobby, the respect we should give this hobby. I'm going to talk about the state of the hobby, talk about teamwork. I'm going to talk about the future of the hobby, and I'm going to challenge you to do some things, the way I often do when I talk to groups, about building our legacy for the next 100 years. Brian gave you a little bit of history on me. I'll tell you a little bit more. I was born in a small little rural town at the foot of the Ozark Mountains in Arkansas. Like Brian said, I got into ham radio over 47 years ago. And it was something back then for a kid like me who had never traveled outside the state of Arkansas to become a ham radio operator. There just wasn't many of them in town at all. But I remember I'd heard about ham radio and the fact that I could talk around the world on that radio. I couldn't believe that I could be in my bedroom and talk across the world on that radio. And that just amazed me as a teenager. And so I started reading about ham radio and was quite enthused about it, and I particularly wanted to work DX. And when I got my license, I started DXing immediately and busting pileups, and I still love busting pileups, especially against you East Coast guys. I hate y'all. Can't stand the East Coast. By the way, the sixes in here, I don't like you either. Well, I tell you, I could tell DX stories all day long, too, let me tell you. But before I go further, I'd like to talk about my hero in life, and that's my wife, Holly, because some of the funny stories I always tell have to do with her. She does go wherever I go, as Brian said, Ham Fest, wherever, club meetings. She has for many years. And she often works the ARRL booth, so I got to make a pitch here. She'll be in the ARRL booth this weekend over the next couple of 3 days. You need to go see her because we're running a special. You can get your ARRL renewal membership renewed for $111 for 3 years, and you get a handbook, a softcover handbook. Folks, you can't beat that deal. So I want her to stand up, and yes, stand up. Everybody look for her and go sign up and get your membership renewed. When we first started dating, now this is a true ham radio story. When we first started dating, you know where our first date was? I took her to the club station, W5 Yankee Mike, W5YM, at the University of Arkansas. And I said, this is what I do. I made it real clear up front that hey, this is what I do. And that was our first date. We took some pizza up there, and I operated the radio, and she sat there and looked at what that was all about. There's all kinds of stories I could tell about the crazy things we did growing up, but all I know is this, to talk about how serious this is. When her parents started to hear about some of the things we did that I had her do, they sat her down and talked to her very seriously in a conversation one day and said, tell us about this guy. And particularly when we were kind of getting, like we were going to get married, they talked to her and said, "Are you sure about this, Because we think he's crazy, I remember one time and by the way, all the towers and antennas that I've got, we put up by ourselves except for about the last 2 or 3 sections of a 200-foot tower. So anybody who needs to use her, we hire her out, to run a GenPo. I remember one time back in the 70s when I was trying to really get started on 160 years ago, and as y'all who've run a shunt-fed tower, that can be a little tricky, and there's a lot of crazy things that can happen with a lot of induced voltage depending on how much power you're running. As far as things that go on that tower, like blowing through coax lines and things like that. But I remember one time that we were living in another town at the time. I'd started moving around in my corporate America days, and I'm running Europe. And if you're in 5 land and you've got a good run going to Europe on 160 meters, that's something special back in those days, back before antennas were not very good. And we're still exploring what antennas work on 160. And so it started to snow and sleet outside, and I'm sitting there watching my SWR creep up because, as the snow and sleet came down on the ground, it changed the impedance of the antenna, and it started to get, I could see the SWR going up. But I couldn't release my frequency. There ain't no way I was going to get my frequency up to an East Coast guy, okay? So I told Holly, and this is real late at night too, it's about 1 o'clock in the morning, I was just getting the European sunrise over there. And so I said, honey, I woke her up, said, you've got to go outside and tune that 160-meter antenna, because I ain't giving up the frequency. Now you got to remember, it's snowing and sleeting. So we turned on the floodlights, and my radio room was up in the front part of the house. We opened the windows in the back part of the house so I could yell through the house, okay? And she goes out there, and I remember seeing in the floodlight, she's in her nightgown, and she's trudging through the snow like this, and she sits down on this cement block. And I got my big tuning network and this big canister, out there, this big can. And so she's done this before, but again, it's 1 o'clock and it's snowing and it's just horrible out there. She sticks her hand in there, and I'm watching the SWR meter, and I'm yelling, turn it the other way! She's tuning the variable, vacuum variable, and all of a sudden, I heard this blood-curdling scream. I mean, it was awful. One of those kind, that ain't good. And she had put her finger where it didn't need to go while I'm calling CQ contest, and she probably still has the RF burn on her finger to this day. Now, that's a dedicated spouse, let me tell you. Of course, I said, we're not there yet. You got to keep tuning, Then I remember another time, and she's going to kill me for telling this story, but I was in a contest again, and I was making a run down on 160 meters, and like I say, there's a lot of induced voltage on a shunt-fed tower, and sometimes you can, have problems with something arcing over and everything. And I'd noticed my SWR a couple of times had kind of blipped up there, and so thought, oh man, something's getting ready to break down. And all of a sudden the doorbell rings, there's a knock on the door, and it's the neighbor. And Holly goes to the door, and I'm still working the contest, and she comes running back in there and said, the neighbor says your tower is on fire. And I said, what? So I put the keyer on automatic because I wasn't about to give up my frequency, okay? So I go running through the house and still calling CQ test, and I look up outside, and sure enough, that top of that tower was on fire. It wasn't just a little arc, y'all. It was on fire, and it was just whoop, 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 whoop. It was going at it. Anyway, I had blown through a piece of coax up there, and Riley, I wasn't running illegal power wherever you're sitting. But needless to say, it made a mess of things, and it really was on fire. Shortly after that, my neighbors got mad at me, and they didn't like me, and they started taking pictures of me, and that's when Riley did open up a file on me. One other time, I remember I was working on one of my homemade power supplies because I love big amplifiers and big power supplies particularly. And I had one I was working on in the floor in my room, and I was working on it, and it shorted across this broken ceramic that I didn't know, insulator that was there, and and it sounded like a shotgun going off. Y'all ever had that happen, you know, when a power supply blows up, you know, like a pole peg transformer type 2, you know? It makes a big noise. It scared the daylights out of me. It went kaboom, you know, and the whole house went quiet. And Holly was in the living room with the 2 boys. They were young at the time, and they were just dead silent too. I mean, it was just dead silent. I'm looking around going, am I even alive, you know? And I want y'all to know something. She said, all I remember is the first thing she said was, boys, I hope your dad had his life insurance up to date. Honest to Pete, that's what she said. Oh, I could go on with these fun stories to remember and tell, and I suspect everybody in here's got them, you know, that relate to you individually. I can remember back when we had tube radios, and I know there's a lot of old-timers in here. Y'all remember when you had tube radios, you know? My parents kicked me out of my bedroom when my antenna got hit by lightning and blew the house up. They got me one of them little buildings, you know, put it in the backyard. That's where I lived the last 3 years of high school, let me tell you. But I used to be out there all night long. I mean, I wouldn't even sleep in the house. I'd sleep out on a cot in that little 8x10 room. And I'd turn the lights out and operate all night long just watching the glow of the tubes. I had a Heathkit SB200 I'd built, and I can still remember to this day, you know, working the pileups and working DX and working contests and seeing the red glow of those 572Bs get hotter and hotter. You know what I'm talking about? It's just, those were the days, weren't they? I felt like a mad scientist staying in there all night long, you know, with the lights out, just watching those tubes glow. Anyway, there are so many wonderful stories we could tell, and we all have those similar ones, and those are the type of treasured memories that I think we need to remember, and I think we need to keep talking about back in our communities and in our clubs. And I get older, you know, they become even more treasured memories. I saw a dear friend of mine walk in the door they haven't seen in a long time, W5SJ, Bill Priakis. He's an old Arkansas guy that moved away, and he watched me grow up. And I know that he remembers some of those treasured memories. And he said, Rick, all our buddies are dying. And I said, I know, Bill. And that is a sad thing about our hobby. We've got an age demographic that shows that we're a lot in the 50s and 60s. But it's important that we pass those treasured memories on and get new hams into the hobby. How did you become a ham, by the way? Think about that for a minute. You know, why did you even want to become a radio operator? I mean, ham radio operators are weird, right? Haven't you been told that before, sometime or another? I mean, have we looked at each other and go, man, you're weird, you know? But, you know, we're different, possibly, but I don't think we're weird. I do think, again, what I said earlier, we are an elite group of people. And another thing that comes to mind is, when I talk about ham radio and think about us and our group, is, are we relevant? Are we relevant as a hobby? Well, we're world communicators. We provide public service. We provide emergency and disaster communications. We help save lives. Sometimes we're the first to arrive at set up an emergency communications. We talk to the jungles of Africa and the beaches of the South Pacific. We bounce signals off the moon. We talk to astronauts. We promote technology. Yes, we are relevant. My mom used to say, not everyone can be a ham radio operator. She would say, not everyone can do what you do. She would say that ham radio helped make me a success in life by building my confidence in doing things, by achieving things. She said I could walk into any room and talk to anybody regardless of age or background because of my experiences in ham radio. You know, I'd never met a ham until I knocked on the door of somebody in my little hometown and asked them to give me my novice exam. There just wasn't many hams around. I remember riding my bike across town and knocking on that door to this day and introducing myself and asking that ham, would you give me my novice exam? And I was so proud when I passed. And I remember how proud I was when my license came in the mail. And back in those days, you had to wait weeks and weeks. And I remember going to the mailbox every day looking for that license. You know, my parents were quite proud of me of being an amateur radio operator too. And I remember when I finally realized my dad had also realized how important and significant this hobby was my dad was old school. You know, he is that generation that didn't show a lot of emotions. You know, when we said goodbye and I went off to college and all that, we didn't hug, we shook hands. But I remember, and I remember one day I came home from school and he was sitting at the kitchen table and he had this look on his face. And you remember how parents had this look, you know, and you could just tell, you know, they hadn't said anything to you yet, but you just knew something was going on. And I just knew something was going on with my dad. And then I kept looking at him, and I'd walk around and come up there and look at him. And then it finally dawned on me that he had one of my QSL cards in the front pocket, kind of sticking out. And what it was my first DX QSL card. It was K5UR from the U.S. Virgin Islands. I remember it to this day. And he had gotten the card in the mail because he had picked up the mail. And he said, "That's a foreign country. My kid can talk outside the United States." That was significant to him. And he had that card waiting on me. I can also remember a time when I looked out in the yard and my mom had the neighbor wives out there, and they were huddled together and kind of like this. You know, I knew she was showing them something. And I went up to the kitchen and looked out the kitchen window where I could get a better look. And you know what she was showing the neighbors? My QSL cards. You know, my son is a ham radio operator. I remember one time also that it was a Saturday morning. I was in my bedroom working the radio. That's before they kicked me out in the backyard. And I saw somebody drive up, heard the doorbell ring. I looked out the window, and it was a beat-up old pickup truck, and I knew it was somebody from the hills who'd come to see Dad. And everybody knew my dad because he was the only banker in town and for many years, really, and helped a lot of people. And they knew Dad, and they had heard that his son was a ham radio operator. And I went down the hallway and was kind of eavesdropping on the conversation, and he said, "Mr. Roderick, you know, we heard your son was a ham radio operator. That means he's got to be smart. We have our television set in the back of our pickup truck, and we can't fix it." And he said, would you mind if your son looked at our television set, because we don't have any money, you know, to get it fixed? And they didn't. Now that tells me something right there, you know. Did y'all hear what I just said? That guy said, "We heard your son was a ham radio operator, therefore what? He's got to be smart." Now that says something about our hobby. That says something about you, doesn't it? Y'all probably wonder, could I fix this TV set? Fortunately, I did. Anyway, you know, my parents were proud of me, and we ought to be proud of ourselves being ham radio operators. We are considered elite. We are considered smart. You know, I think ham radio is the greatest hobby in the world. It is, isn't it? Our stories are of greatness, and you have treasured memories to tell back home, and I challenge you to do so. Do you remember when you got your first QSL card? Do you remember when you got it and put it in your hand and you put it on the wall? Do you remember those days? I bet everybody in here can remember that event. Do you remember how remarkable it was when you had your first QSO? I can remember mine just like it happened yesterday. Those are the wonderful things. You know, I tell this story a lot about how I was trying to work the space shuttle years ago, and I wanted to get it on tape recording and play it for the boys, my sons, which were real little at the time, like in the first and second grade. And this was one of the first times that the astronauts were actually going to try to talk to hams on 2 meters FM, split frequency. And I didn't have an elevation antenna. I had a real nice sideband 2-meter weak signal system set up. And they were going to be coming over the horizon about 4 o'clock in the morning. So I set the clock, figured I'd have about a 7-minute window, plus or minus this, when they come over the sunrise. And so I've got everything fired up. I got the amp warmed up. I mean, I'm ready to go, you know, and I'm pumped. I'm ready to go. So I'm treating it just like working a DX station on 20 meters. And all of a sudden, I could start to hear them. And they were working the world. You can just imagine, working the world. So I start calling, and I start screaming my bloody lungs out. And I'm on FM as if it makes a lot of difference, okay? Kilowatt 5 uniform radio. I mean, I've got the DX voice, and I ain't getting through. And I'm turning everything up I can. Sorry, Riley, wherever you're seated out there. That bird watt meter was singing, let me tell you. And I wasn't getting through. And now they're well over the horizon. I figure I'm going to lose them. I'm not going to get the path, you know. And finally, that astronaut came back, the kilowatt 5 come again. Everybody else stand by. And again, they're split frequency, so I can't hear the big pileup, but I know it's there. And we traded a couple of transmissions, and finally, they got my call. And I said, please say hello to my sons, Christopher and Stephen. Now, I've got a tape recorder going, okay, because I want them to hear this, the old cassette tape. So, and she didn't get it. I was covered up. And again, their signal's getting weaker because I'm well after the sunrise now. They're sunrise shots, so I'm losing them. I said, that's not going to happen. I said one more time, please tell my sons, Christopher and Stephen, hello. And so the frequency's dead quiet. There's a pause, and I said, they're gone, And then all of a sudden, that astronaut comes back and says, hello, Christopher and Stephen from space. Hello, Christopher and Stephen from space. Y'all think about that. And I plopped that little tape out and gave it to Holly. She's a school teacher. Said, take that to school, give it to the kids, and play that in first grade, second grade, third grade, and on up. That's remarkable. One of the other QSOs that's always so memorable to me, and I don't need to move this along so I'm not keep y'all too long, but is my contact with King Hussein, JY1. Back years ago when I was a teenager, I tried to work him many days and never could get through, And then finally one day I worked him, and gosh, I was so excited. But I did something really stupid, because when he finally turned it over, I said, you're 5'9", old man. And I thought, I just called the king an old man, But it just came natural to me. And I never forget that, because I was so embarrassed. Every time anybody worked, your majesty, your highness, and all of that, and I called the king an old man. And then I said, but, I mean your majesty or your highness. And I remember when I turned it over, he was laughing, He was laughing. And I just thought it was so great, that a kid could talk to the king. Ain't ham radio great? And I got to talk to him again about 20 years after that, when he was stateside getting medical treatment before he passed away, and I got to talk to him. This time I didn't call him an old man. But, he was still as friendly then as he always was. I kept thinking, that is the king, Why is he even interested in ham radio? Because he loved it. He had the passion. And he'd love talking to anybody, regardless of who they were. And I put that card up on the wall everywhere I moved around in my corporate life, and it's still up on the wall in a frame to this day. I never have forgotten that. A king and a kid in his bedroom, 14 years old, in a small little town, talking on ham radio to a king. Ain't nothing like it. Anywhere in the world we hams go, there is an instant friendship, regardless of your background, religious beliefs, or what country you're from. It doesn't matter. I mean, we may even go to a country that we're not necessarily friendly with, but it doesn't matter. Hams all over the world welcome other hams, and to me, that's profound. That's the greatness of our hobby. There's no other hobby like it. I challenge you to remember your own great stories and go back to your clubs and tell them. And speaking of clubs, I want to tell a quick story about my club back home. Something really profound happened to me not long ago. I hadn't been back to my club in years and years, and I was going through town, and some of the guys heard me on 2 meters, and they said, Rick, come by, we're having an antenna raising party. The folks would be glad to see you. And I hadn't lived that in town in years and years and years. So I pulled off the interstate, drove up there, and I drove up to this guy's house, pulled in, and there's everybody getting the antenna ready to go up and all that. And I noticed off to the side, there's 3 guys over there, elderly. One of them was in a wheelchair, and they were my Elmers. Now, what is important for you to know is they couldn't climb a tower, they couldn't lift a rope, but they were there. And that meant something to everybody. Now, to me, that's leadership. Can you do the same thing back home? Do you set a good example for others? You know, I mention clubs often in my talks because I'm such a believer that clubs are so important, you know, to always be there for one another. And I tell a funny story at times, and somebody told me, Rick, you got to tell the Geese story. And I said, okay, I'll try to squeeze it in, so I'm going to tell that real quick, because it reminds me a lot when I talk to clubs. But y'all know about geese? Have y'all heard this story about why geese fly in a V formation? Interestingly, they have a good reason for it, because studies have shown that geese flying in a V formation have about a 71% efficiency increase in flight and speed because of the updraft it creates. But there's more. The leaders, those that are typically out front, the goose in front serves a particular period of time, and then they rotate to the back, and then somebody else in the formation moves up. You always hear them honking as they go over. That's what I call it anyway, honking. Well, the geese in the back are honking to let the others know up front, hey, we're behind you. We're still in formation. This is interesting too. A tired or a sick goose that falls out of formation, two geese always fall out of formation as well to stay with that sick goose or that tired goose until that one's ready to go again, and then they fly out together and find their flock and rejoin the formation. Now, folks, a club is similar, in my opinion. A successful club is built on teamwork, and teamwork requires everybody in that club to be in some kind of formation, just like those geese. A club has members who are the honkers who are constantly offering support to the leaders. The leaders are always out front trying to help and direct the club, and sometimes they get tired and they need somebody else to step up. Lastly, just like any other goose, like a member, like that goose that falls out of formation that sometimes runs into trouble in life, the club members ought to be there to help that person out. So I want y'all to think about that when you go back into your home clubs and into your communities. Next time you see a flock of geese fly over in a V formation, I want you to ask yourself, is my club that way? Where am I in that formation? Because I need to be somewhere in it. Speaking of the ARRL real quickly, I just want to say this because I know I'm running short on time. Everybody needs to give to the Second Century campaign. You know, that's been going on now for over a year. We're trying to get $10 million. We're at $7 million plus. We need your help. We need to make sure that we're going to be here 100 years from today. And one way to do that is to support the American Radio Relay League and help us out financially. So I'd like everybody to consider giving before you leave here this weekend. You know, years ago, a famous person, Hiram Percy Maxim, said this: I see a fine, loyal ARRL membership of 20,000 standing shoulder to shoulder and believing in each other and still blazing the way in radio brotherhood taking shape. He said that in 1927, 87 years ago. Another famous ham, Dave Sumner, said last year, because it does exist, among the 161,000 members of the ARRL are tens of thousands of us whose lives and careers have been enriched beyond measure. He said further, we owe a debt to those who came before us, who did the difficult and sometimes thankless work of building and sustaining a national society to promote and advance the art, science, and enjoyment of amateur radio. Folks, those are profound comments from two amateur radio leaders, and you should not forget them. The last things I'd like to say would be more along the lines of a legacy and a challenge. Now, I want y'all to look around the convention this weekend and see how many young people are here. You know, I was watching the lines. I didn't see a lot of young people here. I don't see a lot of young people out there right now. I want to ask you something. Why? Where's our youth? Where are our kids? Where is your legacy? Bottom line, we got to do better. We must build this hobby. We must grow this hobby. We got to attract young people. We got to go back and get our peers back into the hobby. And how we do that, how we recruit people is going to be very important. And you can't be negative. I run into buddies all the time that's always talking about how bad the hobby is, how it's changed, how we wish it was back in the old days. Folks, we're in an element of change. Radios are not near like what they used to be. I can't necessarily sit there anymore in the dark and watch my tubes glow. But that doesn't mean we got to be negative about the hobby. We've got to set a positive example. And you do that by going back home this weekend and getting back into your clubs and into your community and talking up ham radio and building it. Are you going to do something about it, or are you going to wait? Are you going to let this generation do something about it, or are you going to wait for the next generation to do something about it? If you do, it might be too late. Right now, I think everybody in this room needs to make a commitment that we're going to work towards one word: legacy. Are we worthy of leaving a legacy? Are you worthy of leaving an individual legacy? And I'm going to challenge you to do something about your legacy and the legacy that you can leave for this wonderful hobby for decades and decades to come. And I'm going to challenge you to make a difference every year you're a ham when you leave this convention this weekend. And as I said in the beginning, I'm going to challenge you by asking you to do some personal things as well. And I got 5 things here that I believe are not that hard at all that everybody in this room ought to do. Number 1, go to a club meeting. Support your local club. Number 2, help another ham in some way. Go help that young kid or the older ham that can't do much anymore. Just like my Elmers did back at my club. At least they were there. Get someone new into ham radio. Recruit one person. Get that person, likewise recruit another person. It's not that hard to find somebody in 365 days from now that's going to get interested in ham radio. Get someone to join the American Radio Relay League. That is your society. That is your association. And in fact, get that one person to go find somebody else and join. Pass it on. And the last thing that I would like for you to do is this. I want every one of you to go back home and write the word legacy on a piece of paper and stick it on your radio or by your radio. Get one of those little stick-on things, you know, and write legacy so that you see it. And I've written my sign. That's it, right there. I want you to see your sign that you make for yourself every time you walk in the shack. I want that word staring at you in the face every day. I don't want you to forget it, and more so, I want you to do something about it. I want the word legacy bugging you all the time until you do something about it. Until we see more people in ham radio. Until we see rooms like this filled up with more people at Hamfest. Until we see more rooms like this filled up with people wearing ARRL badges. And especially until we see rooms filled up like this with more young people, I want the word legacy haunting you every day you live. When you go to bed tonight, I want you to think about me standing up here with this word legacy staring at you. You know, and we got to talk about giving back. Last night I was talking to a friend of mine I've known for years that I put in high regard, internationally known, Marty Lane, OH2BH, and he was talking to me. I didn't even bring it up. He said, Rick, we've got to get people to give something back. And I said, well, Marty, that's what I'm going to be talking about, is giving something back. And he's a believer in that, and I believe that too. Don't you think it's time, if you may say, well, Rick, I already give back. Well, don't you think it's time to give more back? Maybe just a little bit more. I'm asking you to work on your legacy. I'm asking you to accept the responsibility to do that. Now, those 5 things I asked you to do, they're not that hard. Carter will tell you that. He's been working on them every year, too. That's right, Carter. That's right. I know you have. And like I said, I think it's a chain reaction. You can get other people to do it, too. And make sure you hold them accountable to do it as well. Now, I want everybody in here to do something for me. I want everybody in here to tell me that you will work on those 5 things. If you love this hobby, you'll do it. Now, right now, all of us together, I want everybody in here to say, I will. Let's say it. I will. There's 900 of you people sitting out there. 900 people can go impact a person. Now we're going to have 1,800. Get 1,800 going, they're going to impact 3,600. We can do it. You got 365 days to do those 5 things, and then you got another year after that to do the next 5 things and the 5 things after that. I will do my part. I will not let you down, and I'm asking you to do your part. As I close, I wanted to take just a few more minutes and just say, this is a special day. I want it to be a special day. I don't want you to forget it. I want you to mark it on your calendar. A day when we all decided to do something positively profound for amateur radio. My expectation is that you will. Things will be so positively impacted by the things you people are going to do in this room that we will make a difference. And as we leave here, everybody needs to strive for that excellence that we know we can deliver. We've got to search for the positives and not be negative. You should draw on the passion that you have for this hobby and not give up on it. And let us leave here today and make our positive behavior, which I think is contagious on people if you do it. Let's show that passion. Go back to your clubs and into your communities and make a difference. Tell these stories like I was telling today that are passionate to me. You can see the passion that I have for the hobby. They can see the passion you have for the hobby as well. Go tell your own stories by setting an example. Create a culture of high expectations in your club. Let's get others to enjoy the thrill of ham radio. Let's recruit new people. And like I said a minute ago, go back and get those peers of yours that you haven't seen in a while. As we leave, let's think of us all walking out these doors in just a few minutes, leaving in what? A V formation, just like those geese. I also want y'all to think about something that Riley Hollingsworth often says when I've heard him talk about his love for the hobby. You know, he's also always asking, who's on your shoulders, you know? Who are you carrying on your shoulders? My Elmers back in my club growing up, they carried me on their shoulders for a long time and helped make me a success, like I already told you. Who is on your shoulders? I want y'all to think about that. When I first got up here, I told you I thought I was talking to a lot of special people. Remember the word I've used throughout my presentation, what I think you are? Elite. We are an elite group of people. So the collection of all of us together can be powerful for ham radio. I think you will make a difference. I believe that. Ladies and gentlemen, be a champion of ham radio. You love this hobby. You wouldn't be here today if you didn't. And you're special to this hobby. You wouldn't be here today if you weren't. We can grow this hobby and make it better working together. If we all do these things I'm talking about, I think we will not fail. If we work together, we will not fail. If we work as a team, we will not fail. Now let's go build our legacy. And ladies and gentlemen, don't forget, we are a league of extraordinary people. We're amateur radio, the greatest hobby in the world. Thank you.